Okay, so welcome all to our little film podcast, film-pop culture podcast. Let's just go around and introduce ourselves. My name's Daz.
Hi, I'm Anaja. I just love movies.
And I'm Gerald, but Daz will no doubt from time to time refer to me as Jez, and I've been answering to that for about 20 years now.
Yeah, so we're just a group of friends who really enjoy movies and enjoy analyzing sort of films that probably really shouldn't be analyzed. But anyway, the reason why we're here today is to discuss Avengers Infinity War. We all went to see it a few days ago, and I've actually seen the film twice now. Yeah, so like, do we want to just quickly go around and have a chat about first impressions of the film?
Sounds good.
Yeah. Oh, and just before I forget, this is going to be like a full spoiler discussion. We're just going to be talking about sort of interesting points about the film that we liked, we didn't like, we thought were weird, etc. Right? So yeah, like who wants to start?
I'll start. I really, really loved it. I tend to forget, there have been so many movies that have led up to this, and that's great because you get to know the characters. I do tend to forget the details of movies that have come before. My memory's not that great. Even so, you do have enough of an affinity with the characters to really sort of be carried away with this movie. I was really happy that it started off with so much oomph, and the first thing I thought was, after that first opening scene, are they going to be able to carry this? Are they going to be able to keep this pace up for the whole film? And they really did. So I thought it was fantastic.
So Angela,
and also, yeah,
you're talking about the first scene in Asgard, like the Asgard spaceship, right? Where
it's the spaceship. Yeah. It's such a weird way to open up, because you kind of expect a set piece like that to come in the middle of the movie, but it just starts with that bang. And in that very first scene, you have a key figure die, or even maybe one key figure die in Loki. So that's not really how you expect a movie to start off. So it was a shocking and excellent beginning, and it kept up the pace. Excellent villain. I think Thanos is probably my favorite villain of all time, because he's not, you could argue that he's not really a villain. And we can talk about this later. I could argue that. We can talk about that later. But it was excellent. Really loved it.
Yeah, we definitely need to have a chat about Thanos, because he is really key to this film. Jez?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, I thought it was great. Now, I mean, walking out of the theater, I wasn't entirely sure whether it would be the best of the MCU movies so far, but it's definitely top 5 out of 19.
Top 25%.
Top 25. Look, it doesn't sound like much, but given the variability in quality in the whole range of the MCU movies, to say that it's top 5, top 3 is, I think, to give it pretty high praise. It was enthralling and very, very funny in parts, and I walked in thinking that there was no way the filmmakers, the Russo brothers, would be able to juggle that many characters, but somehow they pulled it off in what can only be described as a sort of incredible feat of combining screenwriting and logistics. And the final 5 minutes were, I think, perhaps the most impactful 5 minutes of the entire run of MCU films. So it is a staggering achievement, notwithstanding that it's just a comic book movie. So I'd give it a very, very enthusiastic 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So I watched this film with these guys a few days ago, and then last night I got roped into watching it again. And typically with these sorts of superhero films, if I watch them the second time, kind of the impact wears off a little bit. I've seen films that the first time I've watched them, and then I've subsequently watched them again, and I've kind of found them a little bit boring. I would actually argue that the first Avengers was kind of like that. When I first watched the first Avengers, I loved it, and then I remember watching it on TV, like a few months later, and I was like, yeah, this is still a pretty good film, but it didn't really enthrall me in the same way that it did when I first watched it. Now, one of the things that I really noticed about this film on the second viewing is that even though you know what's going to happen, it still feels really tense, right? Like, I don't really understand how to explain it, but it's still like a really engaging film on the second watch through. So I think that's like really quite high praise.
And maybe because you don't know it ends well. Like, there's no there isn't a happy ending at the end, so you would still feel tense because you know it's not all going to resolve well for everybody.
Well,
Yeah.
it doesn't resolve at all because we're only halfway through the story.
Yeah. I think I was trying to like process this right when I was watching it. I was trying to understand why is it that I'm still engaged with this film, and I think there are a few things, and I think some of those things, I think points that you guys have already brought up, like I think the way it hangs together, like the way the plot points kind of intertwine, is really cleverly done. I think the other thing actually is that there's this real sense of stakes in the film that they establish by killing people off, but also like the action scene. So I mean, these films, like half of the film is an action scene, right? So like the action scenes still have a lot of tension. And I think the reason those action scenes have tension is because like most of the big action scenes are underpinned by some sort of like genuine emotional conflict, right? So, Anaja, you were talking about that opening scene on Asgard, right? And that's like a little bit of a action scene as well, right? And it's kind of like there's what makes that scene interesting is not like exploding spaceships and etc. It's kind of like the interaction between brothers, that the sacrifice, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. And it's watching people we've previously seen be superheroes be completely defenseless and unable to defend the people they love the most.
Yeah, absolutely. Because throughout the film, all these characters who kind of, in their own films, just, they kick ass and take names, right? And then in this film, you they feel like the underdog, right? Like, is
Yeah.
that kind of how you guys felt as well?
Yeah, no, it totally begins with them being the underdog, and it's an impressive way to begin one of these movies. I mean, the analogy that comes to mind is Logan, where in the first 5-10 minutes of Logan, you see a very, very sick Wolverine inflicting very, very bloody violence on a bunch of people, and you're suddenly thinking to yourself, this is not the world with which I'm familiar, and you get a similar effect in the first couple of minutes of Infinity War because you're not used to seeing the likes of Thor and Loki have their asses handed to them.
Yeah,
But that's exactly what happens, and then to see Idris Elba die in the first 2-3 minutes of the film, and to see, and bearing in mind as well, we also start the movie after the entire body of sort of Asgardian refugees has been wiped out.
Yeah,
So
this is
we've
true.
transitioned from the ending of Thor Ragnarok, which is relatively upbeat, and we see the Asgardians drifting off into space looking for a new home. And this movie begins with that population either wiped out, enslaved, or sort of made sort of even more put into an even more helpless situation. We don't know what's happened to Korg. We don't know what's happened to Valkyrie. Hopefully nothing awful, but we don't know. And it's actually really confronting to find ourselves shifting so suddenly from the upbeat, bright, vibrant ending of Thor Ragnarok into this extremely dark territory.
Yeah.
Can I make one point about stakes, though? So I hear what you say about stakes. Even though I love this movie a lot, the major weakness that it had for me that I felt from the beginning onwards is that I didn't feel it had stakes. Now I know that normally we make that call by do people die or not, right? So if there's a hero
Yeah.
shield around all the characters, no one dies, there are no stakes. If people die, there are stakes. But it's just, do they really die? Even Loki has died before and he's come back. So the second death, I don't completely buy that it's real, and I particularly don't buy that it's real because Thor, even though like this is his brother who in pretty much every movie does the same thing, where he pretty much looks like he's going to betray Thor, and then that bond is just too strong, and that love is too strong, and he moves to help Thor or save Thor. It's such a powerful thing to do, and in this movie he does it again. And even though we've seen it many times, I still think it's a powerful sort of trope. He does it again. He's killed. Thor, he reacts, but his reaction isn't anywhere near as strong as his reaction to his best friend being killed. That's what motivates him to say, you are going to die. So I just don't think that's the end of Loki. I don't think that's how that relationship, that Thor and Loki relationship is going to end. So I don't buy that. So because I didn't buy that very first death, I didn't really buy any of them. And of course, we know that it's not going to end that way. So in a way, I think maybe there will be one or two real deaths out of this, but we don't know who they are. And so I'm not sure there really were any stakes. And I think for me, that was the only real weakness of this movie.
Interesting.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I definitely bought into the stakes fantasy, right? Like I felt. Look, I know Loki is always. They could always resurrect him later because he's Loki, so he's got an infinite get out of jail card, right? But I did buy into the stakes. Like, I did feel like there was a sense of tension that was driven by the fact that Thanos was so much more powerful than everybody else. Look, I agree, right? Like, the reality is that this second, whatever follows up this film, is going to have some sort of resolution. I mean, like, the guys that disappear are not going to disappear for good. They make too much money. So, that's... but, yeah, like, for the period of the film, I felt like I bought into that fantasy. Yeah, I don't know. Let's talk about Loki.
I think part
like,
of it is
do we
also
think
some
he's
of the
dead?
disappearances were quite moving as well. Like, for instance, when Black Panther reaches out for Okoye, and instead of Okoye disappearing, it's Black Panther, and then also particularly the way Spider-Man disappears,
Yes.
clinging on to Tony Stark, and bearing in mind, I mean, Tom Holland looks and sounds like a kid. And so it's actually quite moving to see this very, very scared Peter Parker holding onto Tony Stark and basically dissolving into ash.
Yeah.
And telling Tony Stark just how scared he is. I mean, that I thought was quite moving. So even though, in a sense, there aren't stakes because we're quite confident that these people will be resurrected, given that Black Panther made Marvel Studios $1 bazillion and there's a second Spider-Man movie scheduled. The fact of the matter is they still packed an emotional wallet.
Yeah, I agree. I love that Black Panther bait and switch is because, before that scene, the two people who disappear are Bucky and Falcon. And you're like thinking to yourself, okay, fine, whatever, right? Like, yeah, they're the B team, right? Whatever. And then and then they do that bait and switch with Black Panther, and you're like, oh my god, that guy he's a main character, isn't he? But anyway, like last night actually, Mags brought something up. Like, we'll discuss this towards the later, but the people who survive, I think it's quite interesting to discuss who actually survives and to speculate on what's going to happen next.
I reckon Hawkeye comes in and saves the day.
No one.
It's obvious.
Yeah. So, okay. So, I think, the next thing. Sorry. Before we move on, I think the other thing that kind of really builds, tension in kind of the action scenes. So, look, maybe there are and maybe there aren't stakes, but I think the other thing that really builds tension in the action scenes is that a lot of them really genuinely have emotional impact. And I think about two of the action scenes in particular, right? The one where it's the one where like they first fight the Guardians first fight Thanos, right? When Gamora and the Guardians crew go to the Collector planet and they fight Thanos for the first time, right? And that action scene is like it's a really weird action scene because in some ways it's really about establishing that Gamora and Thanos still have a connection, that despite everything that's kind of happened, they, she still deep down sees him as family. And then the way he reacts is really interesting as well, because you can see that he still sees her as family as well, especially the way he treats Star-Lord. Like, it's kind of like she's bringing her, it's like this really whacked out, she's
bringing the boyfriend home.
Exactly, right? It's such a great scene. Because of that, it's kind of like, it's not just an action scene, it's like, hey dad, this is my boyfriend, right? Like,
so it was this sort of twisted meet the parents.
Yeah. I really love that, and I think the other really good action scene in my mind was the scene where right at the end on Titan, when Thanos is fighting. When like Doctor Strange and Spider-Man and Iron Man, they formulate the plan to kind of get the gauntlet off Thanos, right? And it's all kind of working, right? They're all coordinating together. And the reason it fails is because Peter Quill, Star-Lord, he realizes that Gamora has died. And there's that emotional impact that results from that, right? Like all that entire action scene builds to that point. And you see this sort of scene where all the heroes are desperately sort of trying. And then Peter, because he's so caught up in his own emotions, kind of sabotages that entire plan. It's like, I think that's a really cleverly put together action scene. And even on the second viewing, you're kind of like, man, that feels like all this stuff is happening for a reason, and it feels satisfying because there's that sort of emotional resonance there. Yeah.
It's very believable. Like you want to shout at him to just stop it, but it's so believable that he wouldn't, and that he would act in exactly that way.
Yeah. I think like I think those sorts of moments really make this film like successful, right? Yeah. So I think what do we want to talk about next?
Let's talk about the villain. We might as well talk about the villain.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about Thanos.
Yeah, Daz, I've got a question for you. Thanos, during the course of the movie, collects all 6 of the Infinity Stones, and as a result, as I understand it, he gets the power basically to rewrite reality. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
To
well,
create,
this is
to
the
create
thing.
reality.
To create, rewrite, whatever reality.
Yeah.
Time would be the rewriting.
For him, he's taken a leaf out of the book of the good Reverend Thomas Malthus has decided that the universe is overpopulated.
Yes.
So he's decided he's going to halve the population of the universe with a click of his fingers. But if he's got the power to recreate, rewrite whatever reality, why doesn't he just double the resources in the universe?
This is an excellent point, Jerry. But I guess his point is that if he does that, at some point the population will get like over large again, and he'll have to like just keep doubling the resources. No, you're right. Like, I mean,
I've been thinking about that power. I don't think it really is to just create any kind of reality he wants. I think it's more a perception power, so he can change how people are perceiving reality, right? Because it's not like he can create things to be any way he wants them to be.
Well, I mean, he turns like Star-Lord's gun, which Star-Lord shoots at Gamora, into bubbles. So obviously, it's not just perception. He's turning stuff into. He's altering substance.
If you go with that, though, the whole film doesn't make sense, because once he's got the reality stone, he should really have every other stone by just making that the reality that he wants. So,
yeah. I mean. Yeah, I think it's a comic book film, right? So you can't sit there and like, but within the internal logic, yeah.
But it just struck me, like, sort of thinking about it today. I just thought to myself, well, if this is his problem, then he's got a solution and he's completely passing by, but which makes him, fucking idiot. But
yeah.
maybe I'm just seeing stuff that isn't there.
No.
We'll
Look,
just assume that there's a limit to his reality power.
yeah. And look, I mean, the film kind of does a really good job of shepherding you away from questioning the internal logic of the film. Because the film basically, at multiple points, they talk about if Thanos gets it, he can just snap his fingers and half the population. Like, they keep saying this, right? Like, he'll snap his fingers and half the population of the galaxy will go away, right? He talks about it, and so it's kind of like it shepherds you down this path, which is, oh, when he gets all the stones, this is the only outcome, right? And so, like, and because it's kind of like a tense film, you never question that sort of internal logic. Fair enough, in the harsh light of day, like it's a little bit weird,
but like Anaja, I am fully on board with the idea that Thanos is probably the best villain in the entire MCU so far. Sort of the MCU has had one of the criticisms made of the MCU repeatedly is that the villains have been pretty shit, starting with Jeff Bridges' character in the very first Iron Man, and they have been more or less they have been pretty shit, even though they've cast some great actors in them. And the most vivid example in my memory has to be James Spader as Ultron. Spader is a great actor, a tremendously charismatic performer, someone who would be able to invest a villain role with personality, menace, and every other quality you'd want in a villain. But he was a complete sort of non-entity in Age of Ultron, whereas Brolin as Thanos was amazing. And I've got to say, watching the trailers, I was really skeptical of Thanos. I just thought he looked like a giant purple Brian Dennehy lookalike masquerading or moonlighting as a nightclub bouncer. But he turned out to be a great villain and quite and humanized as well, because we are shown that he genuinely loves Gamora, albeit in a slightly twisted way. He genuinely loves her, and for him, the act of chucking her off the cliff in Vormir was a genuine sacrifice.
Yeah, look, yeah, absolutely. I kind of feel that, like, him doing that kind of reminded me of, and this is me, look, this is the classical education coming out, I guess. But so in the Iliad, right, when Agamemnon kills his own daughter so that the Greek fleet can sail, that's the same impact, right? It's basically, once I've cast that stone, I've got no choice but to go through with my plan, right? Because I've sacrificed too much. I have no, like, in my mind, I don't have another option, right? I thought it was really clever how they did that, because it's kind of like, it sets him on this sort of, like, this path that now he can't even deviate from it, right? So, I thought that was really cool. I also thought that, like, as a villain, look, I agree, right? He's probably, he's quite humanized, right? Because if you think about his interactions with a lot of the other characters, he doesn't necessarily do anything that's, like, unnecessarily cruel. Like, maybe that's a controversial...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, like, even when Strange says, you let Iron Man live and I'll give you the stone, he could have taken the stone and killed Iron Man. He doesn't. He keeps his word. He could have killed Gamora. He could have killed Star-Lord. He never does, because he knows this is someone that his daughter cares about. He could... When the witch, what's her name? Is it Wanda?
Yeah, Scarlet Witch, yeah.
Yeah, when Scarlet Witch, foils his plan by blasting her powers at Vision, that should have made him angry and full of rage, and he should have struck out at her. That's what we're sort of used to seeing. He doesn't do it. He actually tries to give her a few words of condescending comfort before he fixes the situation, but he doesn't kill her just out of spite. So you're absolutely right. He doesn't kill for the sake of it. He only kills to support his ethos and his philosophy and his morality.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of, like, the reason why he's such a great villain is because he does have, like, he has a goal that he's actually trying to achieve, and you kind of see, like, as a villain, he sacrifices things, like, he like, I actually think at the end of the day that this film is kind of like a Thanos character arc, right? Like, you
Oh,
know,
totally. It totally is. I mean, and it ends with him basically in retirement. The last time we see Thanos, he's in this shack on a hill watching the sunset, as he says he would be.
yeah,
After he's killed half the universe, he says he'd retire, watch the sunset, and wait for the sort of plaudits of a grateful universe. So
yeah,
he's not seeking universal domination. He's not a Bond villain trying to take over the world. He's got a cause. He's got an objective. He executes, and having achieved it, he sort of retreats into sort of semi-retirement to pot around and collect his pension. So, which is unique to say the least in superhero films.
I
For
love
me,
it. Yeah,
yeah.
no, go on,
You
Andrew,
can, no, go, go. Look, for me, the only thing that makes him a villain is that he looks like one. For me, that it's like a battle. It's like a battle between two opposing forces, and the only thing that makes one good or evil is just the moral philosophy that you choose, because they both have one, and both of the philosophies have a logical soundness to it. So Thanos's philosophy is, there's no point in saving lives if at the end there's going to be nothing. There's going to be no planets, there's going to be no universe, there's going to be no people. Now, he might be wrong, but he truly believes that. So for him, he's doing what he has to, he's making the sacrifices he has to do to save the world. It's a bit crap because he's acting like God when he's not, and that's the point that Loki makes at the beginning. Like, you'll never be a god, and no one should really have that power to wreak so much destruction just because they believe they're right. And that's the other side of it. That the other side of it is that Thanos doesn't know that this is going to happen. He doesn't know that what happened to his own planet is going to happen to the world, and he should give humanity the chance to fix the problems instead of just acting like a god and snapping his fingers. But both sides, they have some kind of logical soundness to it. So for me, it wasn't really like villain heroes. It was just two very strong forces fighting against each other, and you're just tensely watching to see which one wins. But the other point I want to make is, for me, I don't, you were both talking about, his relationship with Gamora and how he has to make a real sacrifice. Did they ever establish why it is that he loves Gamora but doesn't really have that same level of love for his other adopted children? Like, did they ever really establish that? If they're going to pay it off, don't they need to ground it or establish it?
I think in one of the previous Guardians of the Galaxy movies, we're told that for some strange reason, he pitted the sisters against each other. They'd have to fight each other, and Gamora would always kick Nebula's ass. And every time Nebula's ass got kicked, he took a piece of her body and replaced it with machinery, such that at the end of the day, she is now the basically walking trash can that she is now.
yeah.
Okay.
I think it's kind of implied that he is the ultimate tiger mum, right? Like, basically, he wants his kids to. I mean, he has that line with her where she keeps complaining about how tough her life was, and he basically goes, "Well, don't you enjoy being the toughest lady in the galaxy?" And she has no comeback to that, because I think it's implied that she does, right? So, yeah, look, I agree. It probably could have been fleshed out a little bit better. I think basically the way they short-circuited that was that, like, it's implied that the Soul Stone, you can't really cheat the Soul Stone, right? It's like this universal entity. So, like, if he was like,
he must have loved her.
yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a little bit of a cheat to get around sort of building that relationship. And I agree, that's probably a weakness of the film, but I mean, I guess that's how they do it from a plot perspective.
Yeah.
To your point about like opposing forces clashing, I actually really love that as well, because if you think
I should say,
about
our listeners should get used to the idea that Anage is a bit misanthropic. So the idea of wiping out like whole swathes of
it's not crazy. It's just
doesn't cause it quite the same level of qualms as it would other people.
But like, the philosophy basically, like, what is actually cool about this film is that when you drill down to it, it is actually about two opposing philosophies, because the opposing philosophy is basically the Captain America philosophy, right? Which is, you know how he says multiple times, like, I don't know exactly, I can't remember. It's kind of like you can't leave anybody behind, right? It's like, do you remember when they're talking about sacrificing vision?
Trading lives,
Yeah,
right? You don't
trading
trade
lives.
lives.
That's the line.
Yeah.
That's the line,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah, I mean, this movie could basically be retitled, Avengers Malthus versus Mill.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly. Right. That like one life, if you can save all lives, then you should go as hard as you can to do that. And like Thanos has this ultimate sort of utilitarian view, which is, well, at the end of the day, I'm just going to look at the brutal like economics of like utility, essentially, right? And I mean, this is the answer that it spits out, and I don't like it, but I'm going to execute it. And yeah, look, you're right. Like, it's the strength of belief in those two philosophies that makes this so satisfying, right? Yeah, and
yeah, and there's one other thing I want to emphasize about Thanos' worldview, and that is when he says that with the click of his fingers, half of the universe's population will disappear. He says, "Look, this won't discriminate between rich and poor. There's something chillingly fair and democratic about that." And so what that does, though, is again make his position, if not sort of something that you could wholeheartedly buy, at least something that seems thought through, not entirely completely irrational as well. And so, in a sense, it makes his worldview both more understandable and more horrifying because of it.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other point, like, so this is less of an intellectual point, but as like a villain who uses powers, I actually really love the fact that, like, when he uses the Infinity Stones, it's actually really clear which one he's using at any point in time. Like, so, like, because there's the purple glow when he, like, basically knocks people out with the Power Stone, and then he uses the blue one specifically for the teleportation, and he uses, I think, the red one for the reality bending and that sort of thing. For me, like, I kind of like that because it's kind of like building that internal logic of the film, which is that, hey, like, like, all of these stones, it just doesn't give him just general power. Each of these stones kind of layer his power. So by the time he gets to the fifth stone, it's kind of like game over, right? Like, because he's got so many tools in his tool belt that, anyway, that's like kind of a side point, I guess.
Yeah, no, really cool.
Yeah. Can we talk about villains that sucked? So, do any of you guys actually even know the names of his sidekicks?
Well, the thing is, I've read somewhere that we're talking about the Black Order, and the guy who does most of the talking in the first couple of minutes of the movie is Ebony Maw.
What?
But I would never have known that. And there are fans on the internet who are saying, "Oh, Ebony Maw was really good. He was really well played." I did not get that sense at all. He just seemed like a complete non-entity, and he died a very easy death by being sucked out of his own spaceship, because Spider-Man saw that happen in Aliens.
Yeah.
The female member of the Black
Midnight.
Order
I think
is played.
Midnight and Glaive are the two. Yeah.
Was that in the film? Did they refer to themselves as Midnight and Glaive? I honestly, I watched it again. On my second viewing, I still couldn't figure out what their names were.
I mean, they were just sort of generic henchmen, really.
Yeah. It was kind of disappointing, didn't you? Like, because, look, I guess they had limited time, so they focused it all on Thanos, and I think that was probably the right thing to do.
And they were going to be new, right? So we weren't going to invest that much. They were new characters. I don't think we were going to. Oh, I suppose they could have made them better villains. Yeah.
Yeah. But, the praise I can say is that, like, compared to... Who was the guy in Justice League? The Justice League guy was basically... Yeah, he was basically one of those guys, right? And he was the main villain of Justice League. So I think there's like a vast gulf between those two films.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they don't even sort of bear comparing because Steppenwolf was this completely featureless villain. He kind of looked ugly, but didn't have a personality. His motivation was completely sort of unexplained. Whereas Thanos was a richly realized character, and so Steppenwolf really is on the same level as these members of the Black Order.
Yeah, yeah. Look, to be honest, what the Black Order add is like, the wizard, whatever his name is. Like he talks about the experience of serving Thanos and basically getting eliminated as like a religious experience,
Mm.
like you're blessed, right? So I think that does a really good job of kind of setting the tone that they kind of feel like they're doing like a sacred duty almost for the universe. It's like, you might hate us, but the universe needs this, so we're gonna do it. So yeah.
So they're sort of intergalactic Scientologists.
um. Okay. Cool. So what do we want to? Do any of you guys have? I've got other
Well,
stuff that I'd love to talk about.
yeah,
But I'll.
I mean, is that is I suppose I'd be interested in everyone's views as to, was there a member of the sort of Avengers or Guardians of the Galaxy or any one of the heroes who got short shrift in this movie who just didn't get enough to do? Um, I actually think Black Panther had very little to do in this movie. Sure, there's a one of the concluding fight sequences, battle sequences is in Wakanda, but T'Challa himself has almost nothing to do in this movie. So I think he was wasted. I mean, even though it was very impactful the way he dissolved in the end, the fact of the matter is he actually had very little to do. He probably had less to do even than Okoye, because Okoye teams up with Black Widow to fight the female member of the Black Order. So she actually has sort of a dedicated mini fight scene, whereas he has very little to do. Shuri, his sister, has nothing to do except trying to remove one of the stones.
Yeah,
from
she's just a plot
Vision's forehead.
device, right? She's like
She's
a
not a
cocky.
superhero though, right?
She's not
Like
a
when you're going to
superhero, but
put this many superheroes together, like you can't expect the
True.
subsidiary
But
characters
she
to
was
help.
she was one of the best characters in Black Panther.
She was great. Yeah.
She has almost nothing to do in this. Nothing to do in this movie. I think. I think the Guardians of the Galaxy come off pretty well. They had actually a fair amount to do, even though they began as sort of like some sort of side story in the broader universe of the MCU. So I'd be interested to see if you thought there were any sort of characters who just got short shrift and didn't get enough time.
I never felt like there was someone who got short shrift, but my feeling is always that there's one character that gets too much time, and that's Iron Man. I think we can cut back significantly on the amount of screen time, and I was very disappointed that he did not fade away.
But I have a sneaking suspicion that he's actually going to die for real in the next one.
Yeah.
Because he's about to get married. He's not married yet to Pepper Potts, is he, at the start of the movie? They're still planning their wedding.
They're about to. Yeah.
They're about to get married, which is, I think, a sign that he's a goner in the next one.
Yeah.
I reckon she gets pregnant and then he's a goner.
Because I think that's probably why Strange saves him, because he's got to die in the next one. He's got to avenge. He can't die now.
Look,
He's got to die in the next one.
Strange obviously knows. Yeah, no, we'll come back to that.
Let's come back
Maybe
to that,
Derek
because
can-
I think there's we can speculate on what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
At the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of felt I was pretty satisfied with the screen time that most people got. I have a slight concern that I have a concern with the character of Drax, right? Because Drax in the first film, his humor comes from the fact that he's literal, right? Because his culture he's like a really literal culture, right? But now they've basically just turned him into a moron. It's like the Homer Simpson, like the Homer Simpsonization, right, of this character, where he just does like moronic things.
Yeah, what do you mean you think you're invisible because you're standing there really still?
Yeah,
What?
That's got nothing to do with him being literal. It's just that he's a moron. And
Yeah.
I like Dave Bautista, and I think he's awesome, right? Like, I think he plays that role as well as he can. But I kind of feel like the way they're writing him now is like, yeah, I don't, I think they're tilting over too much to one side. Um, I'll tell you a character that I thought um, got uh, enough screen time, and I thought it was awesome that he got enough screen time. I loved Thor in this film. Okay,
I love Thor.
well, is that because
Okay.
you loved his character or because
No,
he's
both.
hot?
It's a combination of those looks and that character.
Thor has been on the up and up in this franchise. I think sort of about 2 years ago, you would have thought off the back of Winter Soldier and Civil War that Captain America was almost on the verge of being the flagship entry in the entire MCU.
Yeah,
Given that, particularly since we hadn't seen a new Iron Man movie in about 4 or 5 years.
yeah,
Whereas the last two Captain American films were seriously good movies.
yeah, yeah,
Quite serious, but
Yeah.
good movies.
yeah. I'd
So
agree with that. Yeah,
it looked as if he was going to be the flagship entry.
Yeah.
And then with Ragnarok in this movie, and letting Hemsworth apply some comedic skills, he's been a revelation, because the first Thor was pretty good. I hated the second Thor movie. And Ragnarok in this, he's been a very, very good candidate for MVP.
yeah. Look, I think we disagree on the Thor films, but in this film in particular, right? I love how because basically, like, superficially, he's portrayed as a meathead, right? He's just this, like, ultra strong dude. But then in this film, you kind of get an insight into why he is like that, because there's the scene when he's on the ship with Rocket, and Rocket has the heart-to-heart with him, right? And then Thor basically starts, and even earlier, right? He basically starts listing everything that's happened to him. And you sit down and you start thinking, actually, like, this guy has been through a lot. Like, a lot.
Yeah.
And then you kind of realize, and then there's a moment when he kind of, you kind of realize that the reason he's a meathead is because if he stops to actually think about what has happened to him, he's going to mentally break down, right? So basically the only way he knows how to keep going is by just burying it deep inside and just focusing on something that he can do, right? And that something that he can do right now is to focus on getting revenge on Thanos. And for me, that was like a really poignant moment, because it kind of like, it makes all of that, you know, how he's like, you know, the way Hemsworth plays Thor now is like a little bit funny, meatheady, sort of like that's kind of like, it gives the sense that that is a cover for like someone who's basically on the verge of a mental breakdown, right?
For me, what I love about Thor is, yeah, he's charming. He's gorgeous. He plays a god with like an awesome superpower. Love all of that. But I also love that I feel like he's still coming to terms with who he is, and he's on the one hand trying to figure that out, and on the other hand fighting against it, because as you said, some of that might just cripple him. So, you know, in the previous Thor movies, where you come to realize that Asgard was built on a lot of terrible things, pretty much. And so, yeah, I feel like with Thor, he is always trying to come to terms with things, like how powerful he is. You know, he's always kind of on some kind of a mission to prove something to himself or to others, and I like that part of him as well. Yeah.
And he's also now a king without a kingdom.
Yes, this is true. Yeah. Yeah.
So he's in a sense he's sort of the loneliest man in the universe.
Well, his entire race has been eradicated. Like,
yeah.
So,
I mean,
did Tyrion say "hold the door" on Nowhere? Did I hear that?
Did he say that? I don't know.
I swear to God, I heard that. I swear I heard that when Thor is holding the door, you know, and the sun is shining and it's about to destroy him. And what's Tyrion's character?
I don't even giant dwarf.
The giant dwarf.
And Giant Dwarf realizes, oh my God, this could work. He yells, "Hold the door!" And he goes, "I swear to God, he does." Someone needs to confirm this, that I didn't just hear this myself.
I didn't notice that, but maybe I didn't pick up on that meta reference. Yeah. Okay, so for me, I thought Thor was awesome. I actually also thought Captain America was awesome. I like Mags, my wife, has a massive crush on Captain America, and I think I'm kind of getting a bit of a crush on Captain America as well. Like, I don't know, I really love sort of well-made superhero suits, and his suit looks sick in this film. He's like
Can I
his
just
battle
say,
suit.
Evans wears that beard.
He does wear that beard. He looks good in this film, right? Like his costume for this
His
film
hair's a
is
bit
is
longer. He's
awesome.
got that beard. I mean, he's looking better than in the last couple of Captain America movies. He's not wearing that stupid helmet, which makes him look like a blue gimp.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Speaking of suits, what did you think about Spider-Man's spider legs?
That's from the comics though. That's straight from the
Oh, is
comics.
it?
Yeah,
I've
Iron
never seen
Spider.
that before. Gotcha.
Yeah. Like yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. Like I didn't think it was although you know, sort of weird logical things. It's kind of like Spider-Man naturally is ultra strong, and now he has an Iron Man suit, so I don't know
Mm.
what that does to
Has-
him, but anyway. um, yeah, I thought Tom Holland was excellent in this as well. He doesn't have that many scenes, but um, he's just so earnest as a character. Like,
he's a great Peter Parker.
yeah, it's you know the scene when he gets knighted on the
Oh,
spaceship when
yeah.
he goes, "Oh, you're an Avenger now," and the camera kind of lingers on him, and you kind of see him like blink and sort of chuff up. I think that's such a great scene. Like, it really sort of um, yeah, develops his character really well. Um,
Yeah. Oh, look, I think he's been excellent in the three movies he's been in for the MCU. He you know stole Captain America: Civil War. He was excellent in Spider-Man: Homecoming, and in this one. So he seems to know and understand the character really, really well. And I'm actually really looking forward to the next Spider-Man movie. And I can say it's been a long, 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 long time since I was last sort of looking forward to a Spider-Man movie.
Since Spider-Man 2, right? Basically, I don't even know. Did you like those films?
Oh, look, I like Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 3 was a bit overstuffed. I watched The Amazing Spider-Man with Anaja, and that was not great.
Yeah, look, I'd have to
Should we
agree.
talk about where we think it's going in the
Yeah,
next movie?
let's talk about who's left and where we think it's going. So let's
Hawkeye.
yeah, two final points. Let's talk about where things are going, and then after that, let's have a chat about um, how this film would actually play if you hadn't watched any of the Marvel films.
Mm.
So let's talk about who's left, right? So Mags brought up a really interesting point that I failed to realize when I first watched this film. The heroes who are left are actually the Avengers from the original film.
Really?
Yeah, Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, Black Widow, and I'm assuming Hawkeye, right? So
Amazing.
yeah,
Definitely Hawkeye.
yeah. So it's interesting because I didn't notice that, but then Max was like, oh, it's like the second Avengers film is going to be about the old guard basically coming together for the final time, and then they'll retire those guys. I think
Why
that
would they retire them?
because they're so old. Robert Downey Jr., I think he's how many more years can he play the same character?
Well,
Surely they're
you
thinking
can
of
actually see them aging. Like it's quite like striking to see how much they have aged physically. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
they must be reaching the end of contracts, and Marvel as a studio must be thinking, okay, well, what am I going to do next, right? I can't rely on Downey Jr. to like. I know you're sick of him, manager, but
Oh, I'm
you
so
know,
sick of them.
but they can't really rely on him to anchor these films, right? Even Evans, how long has Evans been playing Captain America? Like close to 10 years now.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, you're right. They are. It's all the old Avengers plus Ant-Man, whose omission from this movie remains unexplained. Um,
Well,
but
So-
I still think Tony Stark is not long for this world.
I would tend to agree with you. I think Tony and Cap are both. Well, actually, I don't know. Is Captain America gonna go?
I don't. Well, I don't know. Just pausing on the two of them. Funnily, we still haven't seen a reconciliation between Tony Stark and Steve Rogers yet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is
Because
true.
they don't share any screen time in this movie.
Yeah,
They're in completely different parts of the universe for the whole film.
yeah,
So in the next one, we have to see the reconciliation. Given what has occurred, you can understand how that'll happen. But you know, you can't get over the fact that Bucky killed Stark's parents,
yeah,
and that Rogers has been protecting him. So that has to be resolved. And given the whole Pepper Potts situation, I think it's inevitable that Tony Stark dies, leaving. Otherwise, you wouldn't be seeding the whole sort of Pepper Potts Tony Stark on the verge of getting married thing.
yeah.
Um,
And her potentially pregnant, or because that's the first thing he talks about.
That's happening. Yeah.
Yeah,
no, that's true. But and that's all. I mean, and that's all signaling that he's doomed. And like I said, I think the reason why Strange saves his life is because in the one situation in which Strange sees them, the one scenario in which Strange sees them winning, it is with Tony Stark sacrificing himself somehow.
yeah.
And his time hasn't yet come.
Yeah.
Which is why Strange gives Thanos the time stone.
Yeah. I'd agree with that, actually. I think Captain America Evans is a more interesting one, right? Because you have a situation like they have the Red Skull reveal in this film, right? Which was, when I watched it again last night, there were people in the audience actively asking, "Who is that?" And I think that's a legitimate question, right? You haven't seen this guy for how many years? Like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of bearing in mind that was so long ago. And when's the last time Cobra appeared in a Captain? It made an appearance in the MCU.
Hydra.
I think
Cobra. Cobra was G.I. Joe, buddy.
What's the name of
Hydra.
the bad organization?
Hydra.
Yeah, Hydra.
Hydra.
Sorry, that's right.
Yeah.
We haven't seen Hydra since Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
But is Hydra in Agents of Shield, the TV show?
I don't know. They might be, actually. Yeah, they're a TV villain now. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, understandably, people would have long forgotten who Red Skull is. But yes,
I had forgotten.
he's there.
Did you realize? So this is an interesting question, right? When you saw that interaction, what did you think was going on, Anaja?
Well, no, the first thing I said to Gerald was, "Who is that?" And then he told me it's the baddie from the first Avengers movie. But it didn't resonate. It wasn't an emotional thing for me. It didn't resonate that way. He could have been anybody because I didn't remember who he was and I couldn't recall anything about him.
Yeah, but I think he's interesting because, like, if I thought that Captain America was going to die, the argument that Captain America wouldn't die would be, well, his arch nemesis is back, so who are you going to have to fight this guy if not Captain America? Yeah, so...
But isn't he stuck on that world? Although I guess he doesn't have to be stuck anymore now that the stone.
Yeah, the stone is gone,
taken.
right? Yeah, so
The stone is gone.
So he'll just walk back very slowly to Earth from from this planet.
From
I guess. Yeah.
What's the point of the Soul Stone? Like, what does the Soul Stone do?
No one knows. No one
It's
knows.
like the heart power
It gives Thanos motivation to carry out his plan. It's a power motivation. That's what it is.
It gives them the power to sing like Marvin Gaye.
So, what do you guys think is going to happen? So, Tony's going to sacrifice himself, and they're going to turn back time. Like,
it's going to be the time stone, right? The time stone is going to be used to turn back time because we saw Thanos use the time stone to turn back time and bring Vision back long enough to take the stone off him.
And didn't Strange do that in Doctor Strange as well?
There you go. There you go. Also, the thing with Thanos, even though he seems completely invincible, he's got a major Achilles heel there, which is when you take that glove, what's it called? The I can't, yeah, the gauntlet off. Then he's just anybody else. So yeah, that could be a way that they can possibly defeat him. But I think that might be too easy and not very dramatic if he just takes the gauntlet's a bit heavy,
they just
takes
shoot
it
him.
off.
And he dies. The end. But okay, wait. Is he weak though? Because okay, so you know when he fights the Hulk right at the beginning of the film,
He's got one. He's got one of the stones.
is it implied he's using the stone though? Because he's not. He doesn't have purple stuff flying out of his hand when he's fighting Hulk. So I was thinking that like he naturally is just a super strong guy as well. And
True. But Thor could kill him if Thor had his weapons, right?
yes, but Thor is shown to be stronger than Hulk, right? Thor legitimately, like, I mean, come on, right? In Ragnarok, it's shown that he legitimately
he
knocks
beats
him
the shit
out.
out of the Hulk.
Yeah. So, I mean, does anyone find it weird that Thor is so insanely powerful? Like, his power rating just went through the roof.
But
He's
I mean,
a god.
he is a god.
Is he though? Like, wasn't the point that he was just some alien? Why is he so strong and everybody else in his race is just like a normal dude and he can float around in space without suffering any ill effects, take a hit from a star? He is, like, that guy is off the charts.
I think someone has to bring that supernatural element into it because so many of the other superheroes, there's a scientific explanation behind their powers. Either they, got infected with some kind of chemical, or Iron Man's built them a suit. Where he seems to be the only one that's outside of that, and maybe that's why there's no real limit in terms of just how strong or powerful that he is. I don't know, but I don't object to it. I love watching him annihilate.
I think your opinion is biased. Clouded
Right.
by abs.
Clouded by his thunder.
Although, funnily enough, is this the first movie in which Captain America appears, but he keeps his shirt on?
Captain America, it's Thor gets his kid off all the time. Come on, Cap doesn't really get his kid off that much, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Look,
it's just one of those questions you have to ask.
Mags confirms this because she's an avid Captain America fan and probably has catalogued this, has made a mental catalogue of every time Evans gets his kid off. But anyway, okay, so what else do we want to talk about? Oh, do we want to talk about? No, go.
No, you wanted to talk about, I think perhaps two things. One, where does this rank in the MCU movies? Yep. And I suppose what would it be like if you came in cold off the street?
Okay, let's talk about coming in cold off the street first then. I think for me there was one scene that I think would have been inscrutable if you came off the streets. The scene when Black Panther is walking with Okoye and they're visiting Bucky in the pasture or whatever it is he's doing. And there's no introduction to any of these characters, right? Like, you've gone from space and, like, sort of Captain America and these guys, and then all of a sudden you just have a guy walking across a field to give another guy a bionic arm. No names are used. It's just like, what? So I kind of feel that if you didn't watch Captain America, how would you know who Bucky is? Like, how would you know the significance of what is going on in this scene?
Because Bucky doesn't appear in any of the other movies.
He doesn't, right? Like, that's true. He's not in any of the Avengers films. He's purely a Captain America character.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and I'm like, for me, that was the scene that really made me kind of think. But I'm sure there are kind of other scenes like that where, like, if you had no context, it'd just be completely inscrutable.
Yeah, I think the movie as a whole would be like that because the movie is so dependent upon the previous films as a crutch for for its storytelling, because there's zero exposition and introduction of characters. I mean, if that had to be done from the ground up, this movie would be 10 hours long. It wouldn't be a movie; it'd be a TV show.
Yeah, yeah.
And in a sense, people have made the observation time and again that the MCU isn't so much a movie franchise as it is a long form, almost TV show, but played in the cinema, because all the stories interlock and interconnect in ways that make them feel like different episodes of the one show. So coming in cold, you would not know the background between you would not know, for instance, why it is that Tony Stark is reluctant to call Steve Rogers at the start of the movie.
Do you think that's a weakness of the film, or I mean, I think it's just the nature of the film, right? There's no other way they could have done it.
That's right, and I think you have to judge it according to its terms. And one of the things it does is it assumes some familiarity with these characters on the basis of the last few movies. You can't judge it as a standalone piece of cinema, because it would completely collapse, because it's not a complete story. It's not a complete standalone story. It's one half of a story that's also part of a much bigger story, and to judge it as a standalone would not be to judge it on its terms. So I think it just can't be done. If you were to sort of junk the previous 18 films and just look at this one in isolation, I'm sure you would say, look, this breaks every single one of the rules of storytelling, because it doesn't tell you anything about who these people are. Except Thanos.
It doesn't have time for exposition. But it's not meant to be a standalone movie. It's not meant for that at all. It's not meant for people to come in cold. But even if they did, and people did watch this without watching any other of these movies, even though it would not be anywhere near as good, I think it would hold up maybe better than you might think, because the plot is so excellent. All the nuances would be missed. Many of the jokes would fall flat. Like, think about all the jokes they make about Thor. You kind of need to know about Thor, the character, for any of those to really be as funny as they are. But the plot is excellent. And I think one of the best things about this movie is that all the subplots, there's a sensible and useful mission that all the people are on when they go off on their subplots. And on each of those missions, they all have a real chance of succeeding, and they come really close, but the mission doesn't go to plan, and they keep failing, and they keep failing, and they keep failing, and you really get invested, and you get more anxious, and it builds up, and it builds up. So I think the plot is so good that people might still, and Thanos is such an excellent villain, that people might still get a lot out of it, but it's just hard to know, really. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I would agree with that. I think the plot is, like, it's the pacing and the way all the threads kind of hang together is actually, in some ways, is like a minor miracle that, like, it holds together, right, with so many different characters. And so it's kind of this weird, like, double minor miracle where on the micro scale within the film, all the threads are hanging together. And basically on a macro scale, like, that they've built a universe over 10 films that, like, sort of reasonably and coherently feed into this one film, right? Like, it's actually a pretty, if you sit back and think about it, it's actually a pretty impressive achievement. I mean, they've consistently made decent films, and it feels like there is an intelligence that is guiding these films rather than just, like, individual filmmakers making these things. I think it's actually really impressive.
No, and the really impressive thing about it is they've been patient about it as well. I mean, think of how many movies they made were in the can before they unleashed the first Avengers movie. Compare that to the DC movies. I mean, we got Man of Steel, and then immediately after that, Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice.
Yeah.
We didn't get a Batman movie. We didn't get a Wonder Woman movie at that point. So they basically were trying to make the Avengers about 5 movies too soon, I think, with Batman vs Superman and then with Justice League.
Yeah.
Whereas Marvel, to its credit, has been patient. I mean, it seems that they had the idea to do this, because the after credit stinger of the first Iron Man movie has Nick Fury mentioning the Avengers Initiative to Tony Stark, but they've been patient about it. They sort of laid the groundwork for bringing all these characters together. They introduced them one by one, and sort of let them breathe, let us get to know them, and let us get to fall in love with them, because they're all different and distinctive characters. And importantly, they're not arseholes. Unlike the superheroes in the DC movies. I mean, sort of Superman and Batman are together just giant dickheads in those movies, whereas these people are likable and fun and people you want to hang out with and spend time with. And they've taken their time to introduce their personalities and characters to you in such a way that, in a movie where none of them get too much screen time, you nonetheless don't feel any the poorer for it.
Yeah, agreed. Like, 100% agreed that the Marvel formula focuses on character, right? And then they have a crazy plot, but then the character holds it all together because they're likable characters.
And it's really interesting. It's actually not that dependent upon sort of the impressiveness of the action sequences, for instance, because in a sense, the action sequences in this movie, while they had sort of an emotional grounding to them, weren't actually visually that impressive. I think of all the Marvel movies, the most visually impressive is probably Doctor Strange, because of what it does with the way he folds reality in on itself over and over again. Whereas this movie, like the action sequences, they're big and loud, but they're not as visually interesting or innovative as the ones in Doctor Strange. And what makes them tense is the context in which they appear.
Yeah.
So, and that rather suggests that it is character that is the absolute strength of this movie franchise.
Yeah. Look, 100% agree with all of that. So, shall we wrap this up by talking about where we all think this ranks in the Marvel films? Jez, you want to go first?
Look, I've got a. Maybe it's because I only watched it recently, but I've got a very, very soft spot for Ragnarok, and the way it completely subverts the entire sort of mythos of Thor. I'd be hard pressed to say that this is better than Ragnarok. It's not as fun, but it would certainly be up there. This would certainly be top 3. I can't think of too many Marvel films better than this. I actually don't think that, for instance, the first Avengers was good. The last sort of half an hour, 45 minutes of the first Avengers was good, but that movie takes a long time to get going. And the second Avengers was not great. So my top 3 of all the Marvel movies would be my let's say top 5, and in no particular order, would be Ragnarok, Winter Soldier, Civil War, this, and the first Iron Man.
Really? Okay. Interesting. Okay, that's a whole other discussion then. Anaja, what do you reckon?
I actually fell asleep in the second Avengers movie. I didn't like it. Look, for me, I hate to say it, and I didn't want to say it, so I wasn't going to, but Gerald has said it, so now I will say it too. I'm not sure if Ragnarok is my number 1 or my number 2, and I'm not sure if Infinity War is my number 1 or my number 2, but it's between Ragnarok and Infinity War. I want to say Infinity War because it was just such an amazing achievement, and I didn't expect it to be as great as it was, and I'm so happy that it was. And it's just like Gerald said, it's just so much more fun because there are so many more characters, and they didn't waste them, and it was done so well. So maybe 1 or 2.
Yeah. So for me, Ragnarok is definitely not one of my top 5, and we could have a discussion about that later. But I would rank this, definitely within my top 3. The question would be whether it's 2 or 3. Like for me, Guardians of the Galaxy 1 is like my clear number 1 favorite Marvel film. I feel like that is like a really well self-contained, fun film that was really different at the time. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I really love Guardians 1. I agree, but from a Avengers perspective, I think this is the best Avengers film, like, by far, right? Like,
Oh yeah, certainly.
yeah.
I think there's no contest.
Yeah, Avengers 1 I thought was a really serviceable superhero film, like a really classic sort of superhero film that did really well in its time to gather all these people together. I thought that Avengers 2 was when Marvel learned the lesson not to rush, because I felt that Avengers 2 came out really soon after Avengers 1, and it, like, it didn't feel properly developed Avengers 2, actually.
Well, I think Captain America: Civil War was a better Avengers movie than Avengers: Age of Ultron.
Captain America: Civil War is absolutely an Avengers film. Like, it's an Avengers film in anything but name, right? There's so many
Yeah.
dudes running around in that film, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I would say that this is like probably two or three. I think, yeah. I mean, I've got a soft spot for like some of the weird ones, right? Like, I got a soft spot for Ant-Man. I got a soft spot for like Doctor Strange.
Yeah, I love those.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Civil War, I think, is probably my third fave. So yeah, it's probably for me Guardians, Infinity War, and Civil War. Like, either probably swap those around, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely right up there, and I think that's pretty high praise given that, like, these guys have basically been dominating the superhero game for 10 years, right? So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, it is an amazing accomplishment that they've done what they've done. And sure, this is the product of some big evil corporation, and we're all slaves to Disney, and it's dumbing down a culture. But fuck it, I had a ton of fun, and all proud of them. Sort of, if it is the case that cinema is headed towards big blockbusters and sort of more intimate storytelling as the preserve of television, so be it. If that's the way things are going to be, then this is one of the high points of that sort of movie making.
Yep. Cool. Anja, any last things you want to say?
No, I think you guys covered it all.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for a very positive first podcast. I don't think we're usually this positive. This is not this is not a standard level of discussion, right? As in, usually we rag on films way more than this. But I know it's been quite a long podcast, but thanks to everyone who's been listening, and thanks to everyone who talked
Yeah,
tonight
thanks,
as well.
Jared. It's been really fun.
Yeah. It's actually been really fun and quite relaxed. So let's
Let's do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. We must do this again. So let's see if we can actually get this uploaded. And I'll see you guys next time.
See you then.